Cool.
You're listening to Coffee and Culture on Talk 1260 and 103.7 KTRC. We're streaming at santafe.com. And my name is Matthew Chase Daniel, and I'm your host every other week. And today I am speaking with two people who I just met about 5 minutes ago, Lynn Adler and Bill Shapiro. And there is a new book being published by University of New Mexico Press. It's just coming out now, and there'll be a book signing at Obscura Gallery here in Santa Fe on Friday, May 29th. And the book is Lynn's photographs and edited and with essays by Bill, and then with an interview conversation between Bill and Lynn, and some of Lynn's writing too. So it's a great sort of blend of writing and imagery. And the book is called And So We Moved to Petaca, Portrait of a New Mexico Community. And the photographs were made by Lynn Adler here in the early 1970s in a small rural community in northern New Mexico, kind of near Vallecitos and La Madera, for those of you who know that area. I know that area a little bit, but not Petaca. Never heard of it until a couple months ago when I heard about the book. This was a time when there was so much change in the culture of northern New Mexico, with a lot of hippies and people wanting to get out of New York and LA and San Francisco and live on the land and try and find meaning in a more rural life. Young people getting away from the sort of mass American culture and searching for meaning in other places. And friends of Lynn's moved to Petaca and were somewhat embraced by the community and somewhat embraced the community that was already there and thrived there for a while and eventually left there. And this happened in so many communities throughout northern New Mexico, and with very varying results. Some of these places were communes, some of these places were just people moving into the village. And it was a special time, and it's really changed the culture of northern New Mexico, maybe in good ways and maybe in bad ways. And so this is sort of a portrait of the early times of that sort of movement. And as I was saying to Bill, who just moved to New Mexico a few years ago, this migration continues to northern New Mexico. And for some of the same reasons, still 50 years later. So yeah, Lynn, just tell me a little bit about Petaca and what drew you there and what you saw.
Okay, well, I have to say that what drew me there initially was meeting Marty Greenhut, we were both, after Martin Luther King's assassination, we went to the Poor People's Campaign, which I'm not sure if you are aware of, the whole building a community in the midst of right there in Washington, D.C., building little shacks and bringing people together from many communities, poor communities, to petition grievances to the government. So
and this was the Poor People's Campaign was organized originally by Martin Luther King, but he was assassinated before it came to fruition.
Right. It was his dream. And I was part of the organizing staff. So we heard a lot about the Poor People's Campaign and what he wanted to do. It was kind of his dream. And then he was assassinated. So people wanted to carry that out. And we all went. And one of the groups that was there were representatives from the Alianza, who were trying to deal with land rights. I'm sure you are familiar somewhat with that.
That's Reyes Tijerina.
Reyes Tijerina, yes.
Yeah.
and
And
his
that was
people.
up in
It was in
Tierra
Tierra
Maria.
Maria. Yeah,
Yeah, the La Alianza Federal de Mercedes. And
exactly.
they took over the county
Well,
courthouse there
yeah,
and
they did.
held it for days or weeks or months.
Yeah,
I don't recall. But that
yeah.
was a
It
big
was,
important thing here in northern New
yeah,
Mexico as well, before I
yeah,
was here,
yeah.
obviously. But,
So, one of the people, Marty, had started working with them, and he was all fired up about all the grievances and the land grant situation. And I got involved, and they were also starting a newspaper, El Grito del Norte, and they
mhm.
were looking for people to come to go to New Mexico and just find out, if you spoke Spanish, to go into these little communities and find out from people what they thought were the most important issues. So I thought, well, I'd love to do that. My Spanish was very good then.
Oh,
So I went. And unfortunately, my visit was cut short because my mother passed away and I
mhm.
had to go back to Philadelphia.
And this is
Um,
when, 1970?
1968. This all
68.
happened in 68.
I see.
But the significance of this, ironically, I ended up finding her camera,
Uh-huh.
and the story is in the book.
Yeah, I
And
read that. Yeah.
yeah, so I got obsessed with this having a camera. I don't know what happened, but I just decided I had to use it. So I went back to San Francisco and formed a little collective called Optic Nerve, a little photo collective. And we were in the basement of a warehouse community, Project One, which was a huge building in south of Market that we'd sort of taken over and had to build everything there.
Right.
Our,
I read a little bit about that. It was a abandoned candy factory.
yep, yep. And
And so was it basically squatting there, or was there
well,
permission from?
we actually had got permission. The landlord, this guy, was sort of a visionary in a way, but he also realized he was getting no money at all with nobody there. It was like 6 floors, totally didn't have anything in it. So we said that we would come and we would build spaces and we would be responsible. And God knows he took a chance, and we moved in there. And I wasn't living there, but some people were,
Mhm.
and illegally, of course, at that time, because San Francisco was opposed to that.
Right.
But at any rate, that's what we were doing in the basement. We had a little dark room, and that was where I was at when Sherry and Claudia, had the two women in the book,
Yes.
with their kids. They had also moved to San Francisco, and they could not deal with the cost of everything.
Mhm.
Even then, now it's ridiculous, but it
Yeah.
was pretty bad then.
Yeah. You're still in that. You're in that area still. You're in Berkeley now.
I'm in Berkeley, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, which is, I love it, but it's so expensive.
Yeah. Even Santa
Anyway,
Fe has gotten expensive,
yeah, yeah.
but Petaca is still affordable, I imagine.
Affordable. Well, who is in Petaca? That's a big issue,
Right.
because when we knew nothing. I mean, Marty, he called me up in 1970. He was back in San Francisco with Gloria, his wife, and he was working at this place called Rip Off Press, which you may or may not have ever heard of,
No.
but they they produced wacky comic books,
Nice.
um, and other stuff. And so he learned how to print. But he was really, really compelled to go back to New Mexico. And he said, I'm going. And I heard about this little town. Somebody told him about Petaca. And he said, I'm going. And they went to Petaca. So Marty, and meanwhile, Claudia and Sherry wanted to get out of town also. So they migrated to Petaca,
All right.
knowing nothing.
Yeah. We got to go to a break. We'll be right back. You've been listening to Lynn Adler talking about her connection with northern New Mexico and what brought her there. And we'll be talking a bit more with her and Bill Shapiro coming back right after a minute. You're back listening to Coffee and Culture. My name's Matthew Chase Daniel, talking with Lynn Adler and Bill Shapiro. They have a new book of Lynn's photographs, edited by and curated by Bill Shapiro. There's also, and that book is University of New Mexico Press, called "And So We Moved to Petaca: Portrait of a New Mexico Community." And there's an exhibition of the photographs at Obscura Gallery here in Santa Fe at 225 Delgado Street. There's a reception from 5 to 7 p.m. on Friday, May 29th, and a book signing at 4 p.m. So come out to that. Beautiful black and white photographs. And there's an intimacy in the photographs, Lynn, that I comes just from, I don't know what, from you being young and open and genuinely interested and engaged with the community and the people in a way. And there's a lot of photos of old people and photos of children, which I think you say somewhere in the book, you have found a way of connecting with them most easily, both the old and the young.
Right. Yeah, I think at first, I think they were very perplexed. Why would I want to take their pictures? And I told them that, I liked how they looked and what they were doing. And I was very engaged with them. And one thing that happened after one of my trips, I went back to San Francisco and made a bunch of prints and sent them to Marty and Gloria to distribute to people. And I think that really changed, people then got more engaged.
Yeah, I've done with Axel Contemporary, the mobile gallery that I run with my friend Jerry, 6 projects, one every 2 years in different parts of New Mexico. And we basically covered the whole state with a mobile studio in the back of this truck with a digital camera and a laser printer. And they're formal portraits of people and their persons holding something that has some meaning to them. And as soon as we take it, we print 2 copies, and one we give to the person, the other we glue on the outside of the truck. So it becomes this mobile exhibition. But like you were describing in the book a bit, is that act of generosity, like so many of us now, we're with our cell phones and online, and photographs are just not a special thing in a certain way anymore. Not a rare thing, I should say. And with what you were doing, or even what we were doing 4 years ago in some of these rural communities, having a beautiful physical object of a photograph is special and honoring. And it's this exchange that happens between the photographer and the person being photographed.
Right.
Well, actually, when I first came upon Lynn's photographs, which was on Instagram, the thing that jumped out to me was that intimacy and that level of trust and that ability of the photographer to be so close, physically close to her subject. And I got the sense right away that these were something special and that the photographer had clearly been part of the community and was accepted and trusted. And that's harder to do than you would, than somebody who's not a photographer might expect. And so I find that intimacy and the vulnerability of some of the subjects that she takes pictures of to be one of the standout elements of the pictures themselves.
Yeah, I think, Lynn, you said somewhere in there that I think for a lot of people walking around with a camera, the camera is a deterrent and it creates a barrier between the photographer and the subject. But for you, it was the opposite. It was a entry point for intimacy.
Right. Well, I have to say that before Petaca, I felt that way. I was concerned when I went to the South, somebody had given me a camera and I didn't want to use it because I felt that it would create a separation. But in Petaca, I started taking pictures and I was so enjoying, like I think I started with the kids because they were fascinated by who are these Anglos who are decided to leave. They had these ideas that we all lived in, very beautiful places with everything was automated and, they didn't know.
Right.
And so once they realized that we were really trying to learn their lifestyle and they became, more relaxed. And then the pictures started, it was easier to take pictures.
Yeah.
And I have to say, as far as Bill's concerned, I posted a few pictures on Instagram and I suddenly realized this guy, Bill Shapiro, was responding to my pictures. And I said, who the hell is he?
Mm-hmm.
And I looked him up. And when I saw his connection as editor of Life magazine, I almost fell off my chair because Life was, and as I was growing up, my parents had Life magazine. It would come every week and I would try and race to get it before they found it.
Nice.
Yes. So, and he has been so supportive.
Yeah. Talk a bit about that, Bill, about Life magazine and your role in it and the sort of change. Because you and I are the same age. By the time we were young adults, it was in a certain way the heyday of Life magazine, which started when in the 30s was
1936 was the first issue.
Yeah.
It ran until 1972 as a weekly,
Mm-hmm.
when it was sort of put out of business because of television. And the immediacy of television in the wake of the Vietnam War, and then it was sort of on hiatus for some years. It came back as a monthly in the 80s, then it closed again and opened back up. And so I took over and relaunched it in about 2004.
Mm-hmm.
And ran the magazine for about 5 years, and then the magazine closed, and then started life.com and was there for about 5 years.
Yeah. Nice opportunity. That's such a important property. I don't know how to say it.
It was the honor of a lifetime to be able to work with those photographers and those pictures, because they are history.
Yeah.
And you were starting to go there, but in terms, there are two kinds of histories. There's sort of the world macro history when we think of large scale events, but then there's also small day-to-day history. And what I think Lynn's photographs accomplish so well is they not only capture this time and this place, as you were talking about in the beginning, when back to the land and hippies and New Mexico, but also they capture something that Petaca didn't have, which is photos of the elders, because the town was so poor. Nobody had a camera. Certainly nobody had a 35 millimeter camera like Lynn did. And so there are all these photographs of people. These are the only photographs that exist of them. And so their relatives, who Lynn has dutifully been in touch with over the last few years, they've never seen a photograph of their great grandmother, which is really such a beautiful gift that Lynn has been able to share with these folks.
Yeah. Yeah. You've been in touch, Lynn, back with those same people and their descendants, or?
Yeah. The thing is that most of the people that I knew in Petaca are no longer with us. Even the young people, car accidents, alcohol, drugs, whatever, it was very poor. And so I wanted to track down anybody connected with Petaca. And so I searched and found some relatives. And I had posted some pictures on, I guess it was Squarespace. And they had gone there and seen them. So that began a whole relationship with these folks who would say, oh my God, that's my great great grandmother. I've never had a picture. Yeah, it was really quite
And,
profound.
and Lynn has done something else really, I think, kind of magical. So this gallery opening is on the 29th in the I think it starts about 4 o'clock. She's reached out to so many of these descendants, and a bunch of them have said they're going to come
Yeah,
Oh,
and
that's
and
great.
and see the whole set of pictures and meet each other and meet Lynn and also Marty's son is scheduled to come as well, so that we'll have descendants on both the on sort of both sides of the cultural collide.
yeah. And
Nice.
Luella's daughter, the girl that's on the cover of the book,
Yeah.
I tracked down her daughter, who's probably in her late 40s, and she's coming. So it's going to be quite a scene.
Well, I look forward to it. We have to go to another break. We'll be right back. I'm talking with Lynn Adler and Bill Shapiro, or Shapiro, maybe.
Yeah,
Not sure.
it's Shapiro, but I've been called worse than Shapiro.
Okay, Shapiro. We'll be right back. You're back with Coffee and Culture. We're on Talk 1260 and 103.7 at KTRC out of Santa Fe, streaming at santafe.com. The show airs just after 2 p.m. on Saturdays and then again on Sundays. Podcasts of this show and of other past shows that I've done, you can find on any podcast platform as Coffee and Culture with Matthew Chase Daniel, or you can go to my website, which is chasedaniel.com, and find that. Talking with Lynn Adler, photographer, Bill Shapiro, former editor of Life magazine, also runs founder of bluephoto.co, which is a photo website with works for sale, also works helping people publish photo books, which is a fascinating thing. I think books have gone through such a transformation recently, and so much of what people read as books, to the degree that people read books anymore, they're reading them online, and the sort of physical paper thing is not as prevalent as it once was. But photo books are sort of a different animal because there's a physicality to a printed photograph in a book, which is very much more special than a photo that you see on Instagram.
Yeah.
You know, there's also something else about photo books, which is it gives you the opportunity to pair two photos together on facing pages. And sometimes when they're done right, those paired photos tell a third story that you almost can't predict from seeing the photos separately. And it allows the photographer to create a narrative, how the story sort of unrolls in front of you, which you can't really get on a gallery wall the same way. And obviously, you will never get on an audiobook of photographs.
That would
Yeah.
be challenging.
Yeah, it's funny when I've published some photo books through Axel and of the project I was talking about before and others, but they're always saying with the platform I use to publish, they're like, "Do you want to make a Kindle book of this?" And I'm like, "No, I think just the paper book is going to do the job here." Um, anyway, and so your role in this, Bill, as in Lynn's book, is sort of curator, editor, writer. Uh, where is your part in the vision of making a book? Because a lot of people just don't know what it is to make a book like this.
Well, I think when I saw Lynn's pictures and we started talking, I was so curious about where these pictures came from. What was the backstory? I was completely charmed by the fact that Petaca is only an hour from where I live, and I had never heard of it, which was amazing. So if I'm remembering correctly, I said to Lynn, I think this has the makings of a photo book, and she was excited to give it a go. And so, she sent me her selections, and I narrowed it down and I kind of figured out what the story was. And we had many conversations where she told me who the main characters were, who the secondary characters were, and the tertiary characters. And we sort of, came up with a narrative structure and then decided what else the book needed. And one of the things we decided it needed was a section that was basically how they saw us, the they being the locals in the community, because we didn't want this simply to be a sort of Anglo's vision of what happened. We wanted to collect the thoughts of the people who were there before Lynn arrived. And so she remembered these quotes that these local residents had said, and we kind of did what we could to give more of a 360 picture of the whole time period.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think that, times have changed since the early 70s in terms of the greater cultural awareness of representation and self-representation of different communities. And it's a tricky thing. And I think that it's admirable the way that this book is presented this way. It's not creating a romanticized view of some past primeval, time when things were better. There's beauty and there's struggle in it. And it includes the story of Lynn's friends, as well as the community that was there before her friends got there. And there's this tension at that time, and still in northern New Mexico, in small villages, of people moving in from the outside, whether it was hippie counterculture in the early 70s and communes, New Buffalo and places like that, or whether it's, rich people moving in now and, leaving the cities and wanting to live an idyllic life in the rural northern New Mexico, and through that displacing the communities that are there, and going back to when New Mexico became a state and the government and the Forest Service taking over the lands that were the land grants that Lynn was talking about with La Alianza that they were activating against. And then going back further, and I think, Lynn, you mentioned this a little bit in the book, is that one of the characters in the book is Jicarilla Apache, and Spanish descent, and holds both of those traditions in the pottery making and the curanderismo that she practiced in the village and accepted in the village. But there's an older tension between the Spanish and the native people who were there in that area before the Spanish came.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, she was the only person that I met who had that connection in herself.
Yeah.
But certainly there was, I mean, that period of time before Petaca was founded was the turf of the native folks. And so there was a lot of tension in the beginning. And I will say that I think my friends had no interest in doing a commune. I think they were from, community organizing backgrounds. And what they really wanted to do was learn from whoever was there, because they'd never used a wood burning stove or an outhouse or had to haul water. So they really relied on the folks who were there. And I would say that many of, especially the older people, were very eager to help them. I mean, I think the older folks looked at them as like, who are these crazy people? They're going to starve. They don't know what they're doing. And we got to help them. So there was that kind of relationship, which, evolved. It was really very powerful. And of course, the kids, just like kids everywhere, they were just curious and they wanted to hang out.
Yeah. So many of those kids, not necessarily from Petaca, but I know a lot of people who live still in New Mexico, maybe
Right.
more like in Santa Fe and Taos or Albuquerque than in those little villages, but who grew up in in Penasco or in Trompas or in Truchas or all Dixon, those villages, and grew up in the midst of this sort of counterculture, back to the land, get out of the city movement, and also embedded in these traditional villages. And a lot of them went off, to college on far away, and a lot of them came back and are farming or writing or curating art museums or doing all this amazing work and growing out of that unique northern New Mexico culture of the 70s and 80s,
Yeah.
having grown up there. And it's beautiful to see. And
Yeah.
of my generation, I'm a little older than those people. Those people are in their, 40s now, probably, a lot of
Right.
them. But it's wonderful to see the how things have grown out of that and those different communities coming together.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And I've seen a couple of books about the communes in New Mexico during this more or less this time period. But those were really a different experience.
Yeah.
Those were about people in a way kind of sequestering themselves and surrounding themselves with a select community.
Yeah.
And Lynn's friends did something completely different.
Yeah.
They were about immersion.
Yeah. There's the book that you referenced. One thing I love about this book, we got to go to a break, but I'll just say this, is that in the back is further reading and a lot of references. And I really appreciate that. That book, River of Traps, which you mentioned there, is very influential in my life. Wonderful book in this field. We're going to break now. I'm Matthew Chase Daniel talking with Lynn Adler and Bill Shapiro. We'll be right back. You're back with Coffee and Culture. My name's Matthew Chase Daniel. I'm talking to Lynn Adler and Bill Shapiro about the new book. And so we moved to Petaca. There'll be a book signing and reception starting at 4 p.m. at Obscura Gallery on Friday, May 29th. Oh, now I have to catch my breath. I was just running out to the car. So before the break, we were mentioning that in the back of the book, there's further reading. And one of the books is River of Traps by Bill Du Bois and Alex Harris.
Right.
That when I moved to New Mexico in 1989, had just come out and was similar, a group of young people moving to rural northern New Mexico village and really immersing themselves and learning from the people there and learning to farm and run the acequia. And
Yes.
Well, one of the first people that we sent the book to before it was even sort of done and signed off was Alex, who's a friend of mine, and we wanted to sort of get his opinion, and he loved the book, which was extremely gratifying to both Lynn and to me.
Yeah, I when I moved here and got a copy of that book and read it and looked at it, I was very inspired and enchanted, so to speak. And Bill wrote another great book, Enchantment and Exploitation, about that gets back to a little what we were talking about the land grant issues and the basically a lot of rural communities brought their sheep and their cattle up into the forest in the summer to graze, and that was part of their subsistence agriculture lifestyle. And once the Forest Service was created, that was off limits to those people,
Right.
and that destroyed what was a subsistence economy, not a cash economy, and and taxes really drove a lot of people off the land, or young men to go to Colorado and Idaho to work in potato farms or to Oakland to work in shipyards or whatever. and really changed the culture of northern New Mexico in a way it hadn't been changed for a long,
Right.
long time.
Yeah, well, I heard about that in Petaca because a lot of people did have little small herds of cattle,
Hmm.
and then the Forest Service, if you could graze, but you had to pay, and that became impossible for many of these folks. And the only employment around Petaca, there had been a lumber mill, and there also had been a mica mill, a mica factory,
Hmm.
but that closed down in the 50s, and the lumber mill closed down in the 70s. So there was just very little employment. And a lot of these young kids just, they would either leave, a couple of them went to Vietnam,
Hmm.
or if they stayed in Petaca, it was just, dealing drugs, and there was really not a clear path to anything.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. It's it's difficult. How do you feel? I mean, you went out there in a way because of those issues with La Alianza and what you learned
yeah,
at the Poor People's Campaign. And you were active before that in voter registration in Alabama in 65
yeah,
um, and then continued with photography and documentary film after Pataca.
yeah.
Um, how this is an impossible question to answer, but in the
Good.
way, how has activism of young people or people in general changed in 50, 60 years of that? And where are we now? And what can people do? And how,
Okay,
in your
I
point of
come
view?
on. Well, I think there is still plenty of activism, and I think people, I mean, you know, from in my period of time, it was this was we believed that we were going to change everything,
Hmm.
and so we were willing to take chances. And then now I reflect on what's happened to the voting rights bill, for
Yes.
example, and the very areas where I was working in Hale County, Alabama. I am sure that I haven't looked at the maps, but it's going to be a disaster for people.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of folks, yeah, I'm encouraged because there seem to be a lot of young people who are now becoming more engaged and
Yes.
active. So I think it's just a long struggle. It's
Yeah.
nothing is going to be solved quickly. And of course, we're in a horrible situation now with
Yeah.
the insane president and all the people around him.
Yes.
But I think
Agreed.
we just, we have to just keep on keeping on.
Yeah. We take two steps forward and one step backward, it seems.
Yeah,
And
I
um,
agree.
so much of the activism of your generation did make a huge amount of change. Um, and now there's what we're dealing with now is a backlash against that change of people who didn't appreciate that, don't want that, want things to be different in some mythical way that they think was better
Yes,
for them or their grandparents. Um,
a
and
white
how,
Christian nation.
what's
That's
that?
a white Christian nation.
Right. Which doesn't work for me.
Well, it doesn't work, and it's not going to happen. I
Yeah.
mean, that's absurd. I think I know in California, I think over half the population is Latino.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think people need to, a lot of what the federal government is doing is scaring people into silence, um, labeling people as domestic terrorists for
yeah,
speaking out and marching in the streets. And I think it's important to react against that. And I think young people are
completely,
doing that, and old people are doing that, and got to get out there and vote and
absolutely,
say what you think and say what you
yeah,
believe and shout it from the rooftops.
yep, completely, yeah, we'll do it.
Yeah, it's my personal opinion that one person in the streets is worth 1,000 people, on Twitter or X,
Mhm.
liking something. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, I wrote something down from your essay in the book, Bill, which I'll just read here. You could say that Adler's big-hearted, intimate pictures tell a fish out of water story, and that would be true. But they also tell the story of a moment when soaring idealism met an earthy protectionism, when activism rubbed up against a quiet fear of land loss and gentrification. And I
Yeah.
think that's a beautiful way of saying it, and it's a beautiful portrait of a time and a place that's wonderful to have collected in a book and in an exhibition there at Obscura. And it's also a lesson in a way for to learn from for now.
Yeah. I agree
yeah.
completely.
And I think that's one of the things that Jennifer Schlesinger, who owns the Obscura Gallery, understood immediately when she looked at the photographs, because she's been so supportive of Lynn's work.
Yeah.
And we're just thrilled that it's going to be up on the walls of the Obscura Gallery for everybody to see.
Yeah. So everyone come on out May 29th. That's a Friday. Book signing at 4 p.m. Reception from 5 to 7 p.m. Obscura Gallery at 225 Delgado. You can also find information online at the Obscura Gallery website.
And
So,
the exhibit started May 8th and it runs through June 4th or something, I think.
okay, so it's up now and it'll be up
Yeah.
for a while. So
Yeah.
come on out and see it, buy photographs, buy the
Yeah.
book. Thank you both so much. It's been a pleasure visiting with
Thank
you. This is Coffee and Culture.